From the New York Times, reporter Michael Barbaro, 27 July 2009. Listeners, I am recording this more than a decade after it published. Only chance brings my attention to this article now. The conversation with a neighbor. There is no link to news. This is now history. The Garden State, fertile ground for graft. Cash in an envelope in return for a promise that a development project will speed along, unhindered by bureaucratic delays. A handshake to seal the deal. It is the most cliched, unimaginative form of corruption, and its persistent hold on New Jersey's elected leaders seems unrivaled in American government. Over the last decade alone, nearly 150 of the state's senators, mayors, county executives, and council members have been arrested and charged with leaping at the chance to engage in this lowest common denominator crime, at times for laughably small amounts of money. But the history goes back much further than that. Everyone says it couldn't happen to them until it happens, says Robert C. Botti, who became mayor of Union City in 1982 after his predecessor was sentenced to 7 years for seeking bribes for a school construction contract. So how did Mr. Botti, a self-styled reformer, top that? He rigged bids for school janitorial contracts, earning an 18-month prison sentence of his own. Nobody starts out that way, he said, a rueful tone in his voice. As 44 people walked before cameras last week, their hands in cuffs, after they were arrested in the state's biggest corruption scandal in years. But not, to be sure, that many years, even their most scandal-fatigued constituents, from the gritty precincts of Journal Square in Jersey City to the glittering new condominiums on the Hudson in Hoboken, began to wonder, why is New Jersey so unshakably corrupt? The answer, it turns out, has many nuances as corruption itself. Interviews with law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and perhaps the best authority on the subject, those arrested in the previous sweeps, like Mr. Botti, revealed a culture of corruption so ingrained that it has become impossible to resist when the envelope appears. A decade-long building boom has flooded towns with millions of developmental dollars, as well as wealthy businessmen eager to secure sewer permits and zoning waivers. The Democratic Party firmly dominates local politics, turning most elections into sleepy coronations. The state's news organizations, once vigorous watchdogs, have been decimated by a deep industry downturn. Add to all the fact that New Jersey is divided into hundreds of tiny fiefdoms, where part-time elected officials without much education and with small salaries wield considerable power, and the heady mix of arrogance, control, and promised payoffs dissolves the will of the most determined reformer. It also seems to dissolve their intelligence and caution, because often enough the man with the envelope is wearing a wire. In New Jersey, you're encouraged to break the law, said Alan C. Marcus, a longtime Republican operative who has worked in the state for decades, observing all matter of malfeasance. Like this, a state lawmaker who, in fit of pique, said the reason he did not refer business to Mr. Marcus was because you don't kick back. Mr. Marcus said he became so disenchanted with the political culture that he has re-engineered his business, from lobbying to public relations, so that I never have to be in the room with another politician again. It was always like this. proud New Jersey residents say, but in reality, it always was. As far back as 1870, a grand jury in Hudson County indicted 2 police commissioners accused of awarding contracts to fictitious groups. And by 1970, fraud, extortion, and kickbacks had become common as traffic jams on the New Jersey Turnpike. In 1971, Mayor Thomas Whelan of Jersey City was convicted of collecting millions in kickbacks from companies doing business with Jersey City and Hudson County. In 1982, William V. Musto, who served simultaneously as the mayor of Union City and a state senator, was convicted of seeking bribes in return for school construction contracts, paving the way for Mr. Botti, whose bid rig conviction arrived less than a year later. In 1991, Gerald McCann, the mayor of Jersey City, was convicted of defrauding a bank of more than $250,000, $260,000, between the end of his first term and his re-election. And in 2004, Joseph Auriemma, the former top administrator of North Bergen, pleaded guilty to accepting $35,000 in cash and home improvements from a builder in exchange for handing out lucrative contracts. Academics say that the state's history of decentralized small-bore government is to blame. There are 566 municipalities, many with paltry budgets and skeletal staffs, whose leaders arrive in government with little training and salaries of less than $15,000 a year. Some politicians hold 2 elected offices at once, allowing under state law, which makes them really susceptible to corruption because they have a powerful role at 2 levels of government, said Christopher J. Christie, the former United States attorney who has indicted a parade of New Jersey officials and who is now the Republican candidate for governor. Secrecy prevails, sometimes for lack of resources, shielding the graft. You can't even get a copy of the municipal budget online in many of these towns, said Ingrid W. Reed, the director of the New Jersey Project at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. That structure does not exist. In that environment, she said, ethics is often the first casualty. What educated guy would want to be the mayor of a small town with 3,000 people, said former Representative Cornelius E. Gallagher, a one-time Hudson County lawmaker. All of a sudden, he has power and is tempted, especially if he is a poor guy, so he yields to temptation. You can't condone it, but it happens. Like many of his colleagues, Mr. Gallagher knows something about temptation. In 1973, he pleaded guilty, evading $74,000 in taxes. Asked about the case, he said he was harassed out of office by overzealous prosecutors. Mr. Botti, the convicted former mayor of Union City, recalled that his salary in government was abysmal. You are sitting down, you asked. It was $7,500. Recalling his own ethical challenges, he said, I was a kid. You start out full of energy, you have ideas, you want to see things improve, to develop a better way of life, and things happen along the way. He said the complexity of the scheme unveiled last week, which involved 3 mayors, 2 state assembly members, and 5 rabbis, was mind-boggling compared to his crimes. Mine was about brooms and buckets and mops, he said. Many New Jersey residents are less impressed. The interviews around the state, several simply shrugged at the latest indictments. The 3rd, 4th, 5th wave of their lives. I don't know. If I wasn't surprised because it's New Jersey or because it's politicians, said Cynthia Rose, 30, a makeup artist who lives in Jersey City. I hate to be so jaded, she added. Perhaps the biggest surprise was relatively small dollar amounts, bribes of $10,000 here, $20,000 there. In Hoboken, where Mayor Cammarano III is accused of accepting $25,000 bribe just weeks after taking office, Stu Buchbinder, 30, said he couldn't understand how a public official with a salary of more than $100,000 would jeopardize his career for such a sum. For 25 grand? It's not worth throwing everything away, said Mr. Buchbinder, a computer programmer, but he predicted that Mr. Cammarano's replacement would be equally susceptible. Will they take bribes? Probably. He paused. Possibly smarter about it, wait longer, he said. The New York Times reporter was Michael Barbaro. He was assisted, contributor reporting is Nate Schweber. From the New York Times, reporter Michael Barbaro, 27 July 2009. Listeners, I'm recording this more than a decade after it published. Only chance brings my attention to this article now. The conversation with a neighbor. There is no link to news. This is now history. The Garden State, fertile ground for graft. Cash in an envelope in return for a promise that a development project